everyone. Good evening. I'm Major Garrett in Milwaukee. Welcome to a special Republican National Convention edition of America Decides. It has already been an enormously news-heavy day on this very first day of the Republican National Convention. So much news, I've got to consult my notepad here, so bear with me as I do it. First of all, former President Trump nominated a historic third time by the Republican Party as its presidential nominee. The first time ever in the history of the Republican Party that has happened in 3 consecutive presidential cycles. Also, very noteworthy, former President Trump has named his running mate, Ohio Senator J.D. Vance, the first millennial ever to appear on a major party ticket. Thirdly, as I keep track of my notes, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was granted a long-standing request for Secret Service protection that came through today. And Robert F. Kennedy Jr. expressed thanks for that decision. Adjacent to that news, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and former President Trump here in Milwaukee this morning had a brief and cordial meeting. Nothing really substantive. They just talked, they said, about issues related to national unity. Finally, this morning, breaking news out of Florida, where federal district judge Eileen Cannon dismissed entirely the case brought against former President Trump for alleged mishandling of classified documents and obstruction of justice. Judge Cannon did not do that on the merits of the case, but did that rather in deference to a legal technicality, ruling that the appointment of special counsel Jack Smith exceeded the authority possessed by the Department of Justice. Technicality or not, that case, for all intents and purposes, is off the books. It may be refiled, but for now, there are those in this arena, Fiserv Forum at the Republican National Convention, who will consider it more than a small token of vindication, at least legally speaking, for former President Trump. I want to bring in CBS News political correspondent Caitlin Huey-Burns, who joins me here as we overlook the floor of the Republican National Convention as the music plays. Caitlin, it's been a very heavy news day. Your impressions of day one?
Well, there's no doubt that the Trump campaign and everyone here is taking what you just described, that decision in Florida, as a big win. I can also say, just having been on the ground here since Thursday in preparation for this meeting, there has been a real sense of messaging about Republican unity, especially in contrast with the Democrats right now. And I think you can describe the atmosphere here today as kind of a completion of a long cycle of Republicans trying to figure out who they are and who they want to be for. A lot of Republicans I've been talking to are very excited about Donald Trump, and it's kind of the completion of his takeover of the Republican Party. I think that's more pronounced with the pick of J.D. Vance as his running mate.
And why do you say that, Caitlin? More pronounced.
J.D. Vance is considered someone early on, even when he was disagreeing with Trump, was able to speak the language of Trump supporters. Remember when he released Hillbilly Elegy, he was kind of seen as the translator for Trump, even though at the time he wasn't supporting him. He has a long record, as we've discussed, of very negative criticisms of the former president. But he also presents some kind of, generational change, but also someone who is carrying the mantle of MAGA, so to speak, and kind of representing the new generation of Trump-style politics. But he can also have a broader appeal because he has kind of a Ivy League pedigree and ties to Silicon Valley, big fundraisers. So kind of weighting those two camps, especially as the Biden campaign has called the Midwest their clearest path to success.
Picking up on that point, Caitlin, for J.D. Vance, Peter Thiel, and Donald Trump Jr., very significant figures. Peter Thiel, founder of PayPal, one of the original outside investors in Facebook. Planeteer is his other company, very deeply wedded to not all of the tech world, but certain parts of it. That's entree for President Trump that he might not have, that is wider possibly with J.D. Vance. And Donald Trump Jr., a staunch advocate for J.D. Vance in this conversation leading up to this announcement today.
Absolutely. The two are very, very close. They talk a lot. They're very close friends. And what's been interesting, as you know from covering Trump for so long, that kind of tech Silicon Valley tribe was a little bit elusive at times. That kind of money is really big, and J.D. Vance was instrumental in connections to the Silicon Valley community. David Sachs, who is going to be speaking here later tonight, hosted a big fundraiser for Donald Trump, brought in $20 million, I believe, and has kind of brought that kind of support in firmly into the Trump camp.
Kaylin Huey-Burns, thank you so very much. I want to go now to CBS News Chief Election and Campaign Correspondent Robert Costa. A news-filled day. Robert Costa, the kind we love, covering politics. Your thoughts?
Just another quiet day here in Milwaukee, Major. What a day for Republicans, because they were so rattled over the weekend by the assassination attempt on former President Donald Trump. And now they saw this cascade of events, as you detailed in your notebook opening up this show today, where they saw the classified documents case dismissed, though it could, of course, still be appealed, likely to be appealed. They see J.D. Vance, the Ohio senator, named, and they see Trump secure the nomination. They also see President Biden speaking out against the ticket, saying that J.D. Vance is a clone of former President Trump on the issues. But what I noticed as I was roaming that convention floor just an hour ago, talking to delegates, talking to Trump allies, is that this is a party that really is 8 years on, 9 years on from Trump's emergence on the political scene, fully in his image, and a running mate who's not trying to make an overture to traditional Republicans, but someone who's underscoring on every issue what Trump believes.
And Robert, to that point, how would you evaluate the transformation of J.D. Vance from being so skeptical of Trump in 2016 that he didn't even vote for him to now a full-on advocate and now a running mate?
It's very rare in American politics to see someone who's in their 30s rise in such a rapid way to a national position, to be a running mate. It reminds me, frankly, of how then Senator Richard Nixon landed on the Republican ticket in 1952 with Dwight Eisenhower. To come really out of nowhere in the House, became famous through his investigations of communism, ultimately lands on the ticket with Eisenhower. A lot of people back in 52, history tells us, were really surprised. Eisenhower, this famous general, is picking Richard Nixon. He's so young. There's some of that reaction today inside the GOP. Some of my sources go, he's 39 years old, a huge age gap with the nominee. But they also understand that Trump is looking to the future, wants someone to carry on his ideological movement, the way he's transformed the party, doesn't want it perhaps to disappear. And to build on Caitlin's excellent reporting, this really is a signal that Trump believes Donald Trump Jr., Tucker Carlson, other family members and allies who want to see Trumpism become a generational force in the Republican Party, not just some spasm that happened early this century.
And Robert, I'm so glad you brought up that history of Richard Nixon, because that key element of being young comparatively, Richard Nixon was, explained at least in part his longevity in the Republican Party. We talked at the opening of this show about Donald Trump being the first Republican ever to win the nomination in 3 consecutive cycles. The only one who comes close is Richard Nixon, claiming the nomination in 1960, 68, and 72. But when you start the process when you're so young, your longevity can affect the future of the party for quite a long time. And J.D. Vance is now at the precipice of that kind of open-ended possible influence of the Republican Party, not just now, but for years and years to come. True?
That is exactly right. And it's so rare for a political figure to emerge from a literary sensation like Hillbilly Elegy to then move to elected office. Usually you become a literary bestseller after you've won a Senate seat, a governor's race, or a House race. J.D. Vance comes out of an older tradition in this country and abroad in Britain of people who start as columnists. Think about Boris Johnson, the former British Prime Minister, made his name as a writer, as a commentator. David Cameron was a marketing executive. Now you see in J.D. Vance in the United States someone who was writing columns before he wrote Hillbilly Elegy, was building his name as someone who had a conservative voice, came from a working area of this country. But it also should be noted that Trump is someone I've covered for a long time, and he really cares about credentials. He cares about how people, where they went to school, the Ivy League. He sees in J.D. Vance someone who served his country in uniform, but also has these credentials that really appeal to him as a person.